Hi, everyone. Welcome to the eighth episode of Hybrid Chats. John, would you believe we're at eight episodes? We've been through 3 seasons, mostly rain in Dublin, but hey, that's Ireland for you. But anyways, welcome, weather aside, welcome to the eighth episode of Hybrid Chats, where John and myself meet and chat through everything that's come out in the previous month around hybrid, remote, in office, could be data, could be opinion, could be something in between, and we try to make sense of it and dispel some of the things that don't make sense and affirm some of the things that do. Speaking of weather, I am in Dublin today, back from a Paris trip. The weather was lovely there. It is usually rainy here, which is the perfect reason to stay home. So I'm very lucky to be able to stay at home when it rains. But how about you, John? Where are you today?
I would love to be in Paris. Our original plan was to actually meet in Paris this week and do it live and in person, but unfortunately, my hopes got crushed and Ireland got beaten in the Rugby World Cup, and I headed home to Cork with my tail between my legs. So, yeah, I'm enduring all sorts of wonderful floods and nice sort of usual rain in Cork. So, it is what it is. We move on.
It is it is what it is. We move on, but yeah, at least we get to be able to work from home when the storms hit. But
It
speaking of
is a
working
gift.
from home,
Yeah.
we're gonna kick off with none else but our friend Nick Bloom, who just came out with his work from home report for October. As a reminder, he has been doing this for quite a few years, and every month he comes out with a report looking into latest data and reports around work from home. So in October's report, what we're seeing is that at this stage, we can say that pretty much we are looking at firm numbers of 28% of days being worked from home, which represents a fivefold increase compared to 2019, which is pretty incredible when you think about
Mm-hmm.
it. It's almost like the 28%. I don't think it gives it as much justice as the fivefold does. But there are a lot of, I think it's a 65 slide presentation. There's so much data in it. And I'm sure loads of things stood out for you, John. But the couple of things that stood out for me, one was that there's pretty much even distribution gender-wise. It doesn't seem
Mm-hmm.
like, the days are more for one over the other. And we'll talk about genders and we'll talk about the impact of working from home for women in a bit. But also the other thing that really, impressed me is that turns out whether you work from home or you go to the office, people still brush their teeth, which I suppose made me very happy. But John, tell me what stood out for you.
Well, we'll leave that little gem of an insight until a little bit later in it, but I get the point. So, look, as always, the WFH research that Nick Bloom and Barrero and others produce on a monthly basis, it is the Bible of what's going on in this. I suppose the best way to describe it is the ever changing intersection of work and workplace and all the attendant issues that have brought that level of change over the last couple of years. So the WFH research that the guys have been doing is by far and away the longest running. It's the largest scale, and what's wonderful about it is that it's all based on real solid academics, and it's all peer reviewed. And the guys assemble a group of academics from all around the world once a year to present papers. And the reason for that is they want to essentially open source this. All of the information is available. All of the data sets are available to researchers around the world. And they're looking for the best way in which to look at information and look at data to produce information that's actionable. So I thought the best thing to do this month was to take you through what I viewed as some of the key findings of this report. And I would strongly encourage people to look at this report. It's a fairly quick read, but you can actually dive down a little bit deeper if you so choose. But I suppose the thing that struck me most was the headline number you talked about, 28% of days being a fivefold increase. Now, the interesting thing with that is that it has kind of flatlined, and we're seeing that almost every month, and it's gone up or down no more than 1% over the course of the last 10 or 11 months. And that's about as statistically significant of a flat line as you can possibly get. Okay, so then you're going to have people saying, well, that doesn't gel with the headlines that I'm reading. Well, interestingly enough, if you go look at office occupancy statistics, this gels really, really closely with office occupancy and the stats therein. So it does. So what people are saying they're doing and with what's actually happening in offices, they are very strongly correlated, and one essentially proves the other. So the research so far has been talking about, or what you've mentioned, talks about the number of days. But let's look at people for a second rather than days. How does it break out across people? Well, not surprisingly, the number of people who work mostly, and I'm going to break this out into three categories: mostly in office, mostly hybrid, or mostly at home. People who are let's call them mostly in office, they're still lean very heavily towards office, and they would consider themselves to be office based. They still make up 59% of all work. Not hugely surprising, because this includes construction, teaching, nursing, policing, retail, and a variety of other healthcare stuff which requires in-person presence. So 59% of those are nothing has changed, and it's in office. On the other side, people who work exclusively from home, and this is where we've got to be very careful so as not to get led astray by the people beating the drum about everybody's working from home. The answer is that is not the answer. Only 12% of people work mostly in the home. So 59% work mostly in the office, 12% work at home. So 5 times more people are office-based than home-based. Now, the piece in the middle is the interesting one, which is hybrid. What percentage of the overall people who work in the workplace in the US, this is all US-based data, and 29% of people operate in a hybrid mode. So that you've got 59 office, 29 hybrid, and 12 home. And it's really important that we ground ourselves in those statistics, because it's very easy to get tied into the folks on one wing talking about everybody's working from home and somebody else saying everybody's working in the office. It is not the case. And there are strong reasons why a lot of the people who are office-based will always remain office-based. So the next observation from the data was that this is significantly stronger in the English-speaking world. So when you take your Australia's, New Zealand, UK, US, Canada, there's a higher percentage of people and a higher percentage of days worked at home in the English-speaking world than in the non-English speaking world. I don't really know what the reason for that is yet, and it's something I'd love to delve into a little bit more. On the flip side, the weakest region in the world is Asia. So there is some body of research that would indicate that the culture of compliance in Asia is largely the reason for that. But I think there's a little bit more to it as well. So there's a bit more to work out, but very clearly there's a statistically significant difference between the English-speaking and the non-English speaking world. Of the European countries, the 2 or 3 countries that are most likely to be like the English-speaking world are Germany, the Netherlands, and I think it's Finland. And interestingly enough, they're 3 countries with a very significant and strong English-speaking group, and fair amount of commerce in those countries. A decent amount of commerce in those countries is conducted through English, so it's not surprising. The next one is assessing what business executives actually think is going to happen in the future. So here we have, over the course of the last couple of months, and in fact, actually, let me rewind for a second. The Labor Day in the US every year brings the month up to it, are all the companies saying, everybody after the summer, everybody's coming back to the office, and we're mandating RTO, return to office, blah, 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 blah. We've seen this 4 years in a row. It happened again this year. And there are plenty of executives out there, CEOs banging the drum. Everybody's, we're mandating that people return. What they're actually saying is we're trying to convince people to come back to the office, and hopefully by the use of this headline and the use of these words, hopefully we'll corral people to come back. Now, what we're actually also seeing is there is no ramification if people at a large scale, if people don't come back, and the number of people who are either terminated or performance managed on the basis of not complying is really, really small. It's less than 10%. So the question was asked by the folks from WFH Research was, what do you think is going to happen with hybrid and remote over the course of the next 10 years? And the interesting thing is, when they're asked that question, the executives all see a significant increase. So for example, with fully remote, they see fully remote going from 11 to 12% to 14 to 15%. Like that's a 20% increase in the number of people remote. So while what may be communicated through headlines is something different, what people actually believe will happen at that level is it shows a little bit of a window into the soul. Next point is on the gender side of it. As you pointed out, there's little or no difference between men and women and the amount of days worked at home. And that's a very interesting lack of difference. But on the flip side, there is a significant difference between education. So people who've had a third level education are far more likely to be able to work from home than people with a lower level of education. Not surprising, because what would be deemed to be sort of knowledge-based workers or people who can work in a distributed fashion tend to have a third level education, and people who tend to be in entry-level jobs and lower-level jobs tend not to have. So it's not a huge surprise, but when you look at it from a large cohort perspective, the difference is quite stark. Another one is age. Age always comes up in this. And so fully remote is a really good way to look at it. And there are differences in all the various age groups. And what it shows is that as people get older, and let's call it in kind of 10-year increments, so people in their mid-20s to mid-30s, statistically they're the lowest. They have the lowest interest in being fully remote, and it goes all the way out to the 55 to 65, which have the highest interest in being fully remote. Now, the differences aren't enormous, but they're significant enough to indicate that the younger folks are more interested in having an element of office-based work. So that's something that we'll come back to in a second. Interesting enough, another bit of research that the guys did was on the retention, and they looked at hybrid. And there's a piece of research in this month's document that talks about the implementation of the hybrid option and what that does to retention. And what it actually does is it reduces the quitting rate by 35% if you implement a hybrid option. What that shows is employees will reward their employees with their long-term commitment if they have a level of autonomy. And to have that level of autonomy, the employer needs to trust the employee. So it all comes back to that T word every single time. Yep. If you trust and you provide a level of autonomy, you will reap the rewards. You mentioned earlier on about brushing the teeth. There was another fascinating bit of data that came up in the research, was on the time gain per day by working from home versus working in an office. And clearly, nobody's going to be surprised at this one, that there's a significant amount of time saved in commuting, and the expectation. The research is showing that it's about 60 minutes a day commuting, which interestingly enough correlates perfectly with what is typically considered to be in the first world, the average commute time being around about the 30 minutes. It's a little bit longer in Asia and some other countries, but around 30 minutes per day is not an unusual. I think Ireland is 26 or 27 minutes. So 60 minutes a day saved, great. But the other funny one is that there's 9 minutes a day shaved off, pardon the pun, people's grooming time by working from home versus working in the office. Now, I can say categorically that in preparation to record this podcast this morning, I did have a shower. I'm not saying I do it every single day, but I did have a shower because I felt that you would probably put me on the spot and ask me. But I will be a gentleman, and I will not ask you whether you've had a shower or whether you've brushed your teeth. I will assume you did.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I have. But it's very funny. Do you know what? There was another one that I really liked, which is, well, it was really interesting around the speeds, right? So, presumably because less people are commuting, there's less traffic. So they looked at speed, and there was, I don't know that they put a number to it, but there was what felt like a significant increase in speed, meaning less traffic, people are driving faster.
Yes. Now, mind you, the speeds that people were going, we're not talking about fast speeds, because the speed in a heavy commute traffic is really, really slow. But there was a discernible increase in speed that would indicate, to your point, that less traffic on the road. So those people who are commuting are actually being rewarded, because it's taking them less time to get to work. So you could potentially say that the more people working from home, it's improving the quality of the commute.
I think that's a very good reason. If you can work from home, please work from home. So the ones that can't can get to the office and back faster.
So another thing that showed up in the research was the preferred days. And look, we all know, and we've seen this from the get-go, that Monday and Friday tend to be the most suitable days, and corralling it into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The second most likely one to gain traction is the Thursday and Friday. So if companies are going to do a 3-day plan, or if departments or divisions, the data would indicate that a Monday, Friday working from home, or Thursday, Friday working from home is probably the best option. And again, this is not rocket science. That would suit people a whole lot more. Imagine being able to plan for 4 consecutive days at home, whether it be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's a whole lot easier. So it's a lot more challenging to be in the office Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So now the interesting thing is what that's the havoc that will create in terms of daycare and creches and other sorts of stuff. That will take a long time to fall out. But they were the interesting observations. So the next thing that the WFH research came across with, what are the main tips for people to actually make it all work? So the first one was, from a leadership perspective, focus on managing outputs and not managing inputs. The typical input is Irina at her desk? Okay, that doesn't prove anything. Is Irina's work output good when she's at her desk? That's a whole lot better. So manage the outputs, not manage the inputs. That's number one. Second one is in terms of managing people from a communications perspective. The question gets asked about cameras on or cameras off. And the best practice across a lot of HR organizations, and the best practice from the researchers have come back with, is encourage cameras on. It's not a mandate, and we need to trust and understand that it's not always the best thing for people to do. But in the main, encourage cameras on, because it encourages a level of openness and honesty and trust and all that kind of stuff. The next one, which is hugely important, is should we meet in person? And very clearly, the advice is intentional meetups are really important. And I would add an extra point on that: intentional meetups, properly coordinated, the right thing. Not a case of, hey, let's just have people come in, 2 days a week if they want to, and hopefully John will meet Irina. No. If it's important that John and people in his group and Irina and people in her group need to actually connect, let's actually make sure that there's a day when these two departments are we're working to get them into the office at the same time, or we're working to have an offsite where those two groups are getting together. So make those meetups intentional rather than the classic BS that we've heard is, oh, everything goes around the water cooler and you just hope that people are going to meet. No, make it intentional, make it coordinated. Another point which is interesting, and I alluded to this earlier on, was that new hires may need more office time. So if you do have new hires and you are concerned that there are aspects of their learning that they're not going to get from fully remote kind of environment, then take that step to encourage new hires to be in the office a little bit more. That's not to say that you can't start up a company fully remote and have your new hires fully inculcated into everything in the company. The research would show that the preponderance of companies that have started since 2011 are far more likely to be fully remote than older companies. And those companies are as successful, if not even more successful, than the old legacy companies. However, if you're an old legacy company that's trying to change, one of the best things to do would be to make sure you don't allow the new hires to fall back in their learning. And if you deem it to be important, potentially encourage a little bit more in-office time for the new hires. And then, of course, the last point, which is a totally obvious one, is offsites are now more important than they've ever been. Offsites, to me, offsite as a boondoggle or just a bonanza or having a bit of a laugh, those days are long gone. Offsites need to be really, really well structured, really well organized. And you should judge, as an employee, you should judge your leadership team by the performance of the leaders when you go to an offsite, because it really needs to be that it's showtime and you're expecting a really good show. You're expecting things to work. So offsites are, as far as I'm concerned, the stakes are much higher with offsites.
Yeah, I agree with you. We just had our one a couple of weeks ago, and that's the thing. Like you want to make the most of it, and you want to combine time to spend just connecting, but also have the proper sessions in the proper environment, and a lot of thought was put into that. It's not oh, a couple of weeks before, let's just go somewhere, spend a few days. No, it's like a couple of months of planning, requires people's time and attention. When you're there, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. So there's a lot of WhatsApping and stuff. But I agree with you. Seeing it as a show is a really good metaphor to use because, this is 3, 4, whatever amount of time a company has decided, really precious time. And like everyone has to feel good and they have to have a good time, and that can feel like I was part of the like little part of the organizing at this one, and I could feel the pressure. It's a bit of like a festival theater production, you want it to work, and I absolutely agree with you. A lot of time and attention needs to be put on
But
that, but the benefits are fantastic.
But Irina, think about it from a capital and from an investment perspective. I mean, if you're an investor in a company and the founders are saying, we're gonna devote money to an offsite, you want a return on that investment. Okay, whether you're spending 20 grand or 200 grand, or for some companies 2 million, right, on an offsite, which is a little bit flash and bougie, but sorry, very flash and very bougie, but you want a return. So, it's really important that we think about it as a show, but a show that really works, that gets the reviews and people want to come back. The last thing actually that's talked about in the research this month was, Nick Bloom was asked on quite a number of things recently, what does he expect of the future? And it's a very regular question that gets asked of Nick and other people who would be deemed to be kind of experts in the future of work. And Nick has been very clear in saying he expects what he calls a hockey stick growth, or what he calls a Nike swoosh growth, also known as a hockey stick, that it will continue to grow. And the basis for that is, number one, is that technology is improving. The technology that we're using now is so much better than it was in February 2020. And every single platform has got better. The reliability is infinitely better. The amount of bells and whistles infinitely better. And we don't even realize it because it's happening incrementally. But when you look at it from across a 3.5 year time frame, it's just we're never concerned about it any longer. It's just there. The next thing to look about it, the future is, I mentioned earlier on, the newer cohort of companies. Like I mentioned, companies that have started since 2011 are resolutely more work from home friendly. Those companies have a good likelihood to be the mid-range and mid-scale and large-scale companies of the 2030s and the 2040s. And if their DNA is fully work from home or largely work from home, then that is going to be one of the drivers that's going to cause the hybrid number to go up from 29 and potentially the remote number going up from 12. I think the hybrid one is going to grow more than the remote one, to be honest. But those combined together are likely to grow quite significantly. And then the one we cannot ever forget is that work from home and hybrid remains an incredibly strong diversity and inclusion play, and diversity, equality, and inclusion play. And it's also a huge retention play. So, essentially you're giving people what they want. So it's not surprising that in a future where we know that diversity, equality, and inclusion is a far bigger stick that companies are being beaten with, quite correctly, because it hasn't really been to the fore over the course of the last 30 to 40 years, that is going to drive a lot of change. So I think overall that hockey stick growth, or that Nike swoosh growth, is down to technology, the newer cohort of companies, and a lot of stuff happening in the DEI space.
As I found out in HR conference that I just returned from, it's now DEIB, because belonging has also been added to that, which I really like.
Thank you. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I really like it. I had a chat with someone at the conference, and I've always felt this, belonging, being part of this organization and feeling, that old joke, what's the difference? Not joke, but like old adage, like what's the difference between equality and inclusion? Equality is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance. And I always like this, you feel like you're part of it. You're not just there for, just for the sake of it, but you're wanted there. You belong
Yep.
there. So I love the new B addition to that. And on the Nike swoosh point, we chatted about this last episode. So if the listeners are interested in hearing more or reading the article, that's all in the previous show. But going back on the equality side of things and the impact it's having, one thing we're already seeing, not as a future trend, but as something that's happening now, is the impact it's having on women. And it's very interesting that, when we look at the numbers, these 28% of days work from home, equally distributed between men and women. For women, it makes a massive difference, especially when they're coming back from maternity. And we know it's really making it possible for them to continue working, right? So on that side, we know it's having a positive impact. But there is, unfortunately, kind of the flip side of that is that, working more from home, working hybrid, seems to be impacting career growth for women more than it is for men. And unfortunately, we can't pretend that isn't the case. The data is there. So I wonder, John, why do you think this is happening? And, what are some strategies that organizations can implement to negate this?
So why is it happening? I can give you a very very simple and trite answer to that. Is that for a long time, the leadership of most organizations has been male, pale, and stale. And that's going to take a significant amount of time to change. It's changing rapidly, but I mean, it's still going to take tens of years for that to change. I think I read recently, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, that there are more CEOs, more CEOs of publicly traded companies are called John than there are actual female CEOs. I think of the top 50 or the top 100 companies in the US. It's something crazy, some crazy stat like that. Like that's the craziness that we're dealing with now. That is changing, and it'll continue to change. That's the first thing that's going to happen. It'll have to change. To me, this is a serious societal challenge. Like, historically, women have predominantly been the carers, and it's going to take a lot more than a pandemic to substantially change this and to, in effect, level the playing field. But you asked, what can organizations do? And that's not to say that an organization can't put things in place that will help cause this change to speed up. One thing to do is make paternity leave match maternity leave, to level the playing field and give both parents the opportunity to care. It's a lot like the more progressive Scandinavian countries, which actually do have mat leave and pat leave being on essentially the same level, which, by the way, also typically yields countries that have the highest lifestyle happiness scores. So there's something about the employees that really like that and benefit from it and actually give back to society. The second thing would be significant structural changes in how many organizations, I think organizations can make significant structural changes in how they look at and handle menstrual and menopausal challenges. And if companies really focus in on that, what they're doing is they're leveling the playing field in a way in which it's going to cause a significantly more open dialogue on issues that cause people to be absent from work or to require a slightly different change in the work structure. Now, beyond that, it's way above my pay grade to talk about the DEIB. So I would defer to the diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging experts who deal with this issue a whole lot more frequently than I do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And judging from the conference that I just went to, seems like there was a lot of good conversations around this. Now, switching gears a little bit, I don't think that we've ever had an episode of hybrid chats where we don't look at like contrasting views of companies when it comes to like, should you be remote first, which is translates into basically it's your choice where you want to work from, or should there be some sort of mandated in office presence in a hybrid fashion? And this episode is no different. So this month we have Nvidia and Roblox. So on one side we have Nvidia, whose CEO Jensen Huang says, look, I said this in February 2020 and it's still valid in October 2023. Where you do your work from is totally up to you. We have amazing offices and you can come and work from them. And their offices really, do look really great. And if it makes sense for you, come. If it doesn't make sense for you, don't. Doesn't really matter. But on the other side, we have Roblox, whose CEO, David Baszucki, says, well, from next year, we're going to have to mandate Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday coming into the office. And you basically have until January to decide if you're okay with that or if you want to move on, if you're not okay with that. Now, we can quickly jump into like, oh, what is right, what is wrong. But I do want to flip it this time around where, we've obviously talked about some of the things that Nick Bloom talks about. Productivity is helped. Employee happiness is helped, especially with the younger population, in spending some time in the office where, if you're working fully remote, you might have forgotten or you might not have experienced the nice, warm and fuzzy feelings of being around colleagues, being mentored, your roadblocks being fixed from a line manager. So how do we look at this kind of ongoing debate when the data is pointing more and more to like technically there are really benefits to spending time together, but should be mandated though? It's the problem with the mandation.
I'm going to slightly challenge one of the comments that you made there. You said about that productivity has increased, and I think at a risk of, I'm going to try to be as balanced as possible. I think that the there's been a lot of research studies looking at productivity and the changes in productivity regarding people working in office or at home or hybrid. And the if you take all of the data that's been analyzed in this, I think it's safe to say that productivity has not changed. It has not been. It has not worsened. So I would strongly challenge people who go out and say, I've looked at study X, and study X says that productivity is down. Because really, if you look at the whole range of studies, the preponderance of the studies would be that productivity has, at worst, it's the same, and at best, it is increased. Sometimes quite a bit, sometimes moderately. But really, there's very, very few, there are very few bits of research, properly done research, that would indicate that productivity has declined. So, but on the flip side, it's very hard to say that the research is in and productivity is up. The research is in and productivity has not gone down. That's my take on it. So I think what's easy to do here is to sit in judgment on various companies' decisions, and we're looking at Nvidia and Roblox. So, but really, each company, each division, each department, and each team within a company has essentially different wants and different needs. Now, that said, I think it's interesting to point out that the world's fastest growing large company of the last few years, Nvidia, is strongly supporting employee choice. And they're strongly endorsing remote work if that's what you want to do. Now, that's not to say that they don't have offices. They do. But what they're saying is, we trust you, and we're delivering you. We're trusting you, and that trust delivers autonomy to you to make that decision. And this is a really smart move, because as the talent market that Nvidia plays in is a likely determining factor. And we've heard this before. Talent, ultimately, and the high end of talent is largely what's going to determine the future. So the large cohort of companies that have started since 2011, as I've mentioned earlier on, they can and are offering the much sought after developer talent. They're offering them all the autonomy and freedom they want. And they're largely hybrid and remote. So for a company like Nvidia to stay relevant and to stay attractive and to continue to bring that developer talent into their organization that's going to help them from an engineering and a development perspective to drive their business forward, they need to meet the talent where the talent wants to be met. And that is in a place of trust and autonomy, which really is in a place where you have to be able to offer remote as a thoroughly viable option. And the companies that succeed in that space, Irina, as you well know, are companies that have a belief in remote first. That doesn't mean remote only, but remote first. So it means that for a company like Nvidia, if somebody is working remotely, that they are not disadvantaged by working remotely, and they have the same access to all tools and access to all employees in the company, just as the same as somebody who sits in the office right next door to the CTO or the CFO. So embracing trust and autonomy requires companies to essentially almost sign up to being remote first, which means we are not going to discriminate against people who make a choice that they're not going to do the commute, that they're going to live where they want to live, and they're going to produce their highest output in that manner. So I think what Nvidia is doing is a talent play, and it'll be very interesting to watch from a stock market perspective, watch both Nvidia and Roblox over the course of the next couple of years to see which one is going to be rewarded in the long run. And I know which I would pick, Nvidia.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I like this idea of, like, at some stage, we have to maybe sit down, take a breath, and just watch and see actually what happens, because there is data, but I think there is some theories as well, and let's see which one ends up working out. I would always pick the choice one, because I know that I like to spend time in the office, and I do spend time in the office, but I have the right circumstances for that. I have the right personality for that. I have colleagues in Boundless who do their best work working from home, and they would dread having to come in 3 days a week every week. And we're all fortunate to be working in a company that gives us that sort of freedom, the way Nvidia does. So I would always opt for that, but I would also sit and watch what happens with other companies. And that kind of brings us to the last bit I would like to cover with you today, before we finish off. And it is around this idea of, I think, over the last 3 years, two echo chambers have
Oh yeah.
formed. On one side, we have the echo chamber of, it has to be remote, it has to be this, it has to be flexible. And on the other side, it's like, no, 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 in office all the time, or like minimum of 3 days. And it's like very similar ways in different parts of society. We tend to go very binary. We form these echo chambers. And there's a lovely piece in Forbes by Deborah Lovich, who is a senior partner in Boston Consulting Group, who's talking about this, these echo chambers and how problematic they can be. And we've certainly seen it, politically, they can be very problematic, because basically the two sides put their fingers in their ears and they stop listening to the other side. And the other side has merits, but also the other side needs to be asked, why do they believe this way? But as a society, we very much function is like, no, 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 my way or the highway. And so she would be on the camp of Nick Bloom and the supporters and advocates of remote work and flexible work um, and hybrid, and saying, I actually am here today with this piece. This ends. I will no longer be this, be part of this echo chamber. I want to listen. I want to ask questions, because that's the only way. Because if we don't understand each other, if we don't understand where the Roblox CEO's thinking is coming from, if we just sit and point fingers, nothing is achieved. But I wonder, obviously you have been an advocate as well, very much for remote work for, very good reasons and
Hmm.
always backed by data. But how do you see this idea of, we should start reconsidering this echo chambering that we've kind of developed in this piece of the industry?
Yeah, I think the best way to approach this is from a purely personal perspective. So this to me is a very personal thing. I can only address this by talking about what I've done to challenge myself and to challenge this whole echo chamber concept. So I think it was late 2020, early 2021. Somebody I was in a conversation with regarding remote work encouraged me to go and have a look at, to have a really clinical look at my Twitter and LinkedIn feed, and almost to put a kind of a plus and a minus beside all of the comments there to see, did you agree? Were those comments that you would agree with? And what I noticed was it was a long list of pluses. So clearly, I had, just through no fault of my own, I had naturally fallen into a personal echo chamber. My feed was way too agreeable, and I had kind of lulled myself into a situation where everybody agreed with me. And the problem with, as we all know, when everybody agrees with you, you think that anybody who disagrees with you is a pure idiot, right? So I had allowed that echo chamber to develop, and it took a really, really deep conscious effort to follow and engage people whose economic, workplace, and political viewpoints I disagreed with. And oh my God, was it challenging. So there are a number of people that I deliberately started following, particularly in LinkedIn. And the one group that I really kind of lent in towards was on the real estate side. So like, now there are days when I want to absolutely scream at some of these people, and there's days when I want to give them a huge thumbs down and all that kind of stuff. But really, the benefit here is learning how to handle an opinion and how to listen to an opinion quietly that completely differs from yours. So like, as I said, I follow people, particularly in the US real estate industry, who are quite vocal in their commentary. Now, you've got to step back a second. and recognize that many of these are clear beneficiaries of any move towards a return to office. So they're clear beneficiaries in any move away from hybrid and remote work. So once you can reconcile with that, you understand that they're protecting both their current, medium, and long-term pay slip. And once you reconcile with that, it's a lot easier to deal with the content because you know that you get to understand what's driving their point of conviction. You know, what that drives me to do is to sometimes be a little bit less assertive and less absolute in the point of view that I put out there. And the reason why that's actually a good thing is it kind of tempers your the conviction that you're always right. But also, who knows? Time may prove that some of the positions that I have taken or potentially would take might well be wrong. And I don't think so, but it's important to recognize that you could be wrong. And, you know, nothing has ever been solved either in a political or an economic perspective by going to war with people. A lot more is actually solved by actually meeting people in the middle. So I would encourage people as best as you possibly can to grit your teeth, grin and bear, and include as many people as you can possibly do in your feed that have an opinion that you know is contrary to yours, and take the opportunity every day to read a couple of comments. To me, it's like a good CEO looking at and reading customer feedback. Because and there was a really interesting one recently. Tim Cook at Apple is notorious for reading the first half an hour of every morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, whatever time he gets up, reading customer reviews. And yeah, he gets a lot of positive, but it actually takes away the echo chamber because he gets a lot of the negatives as well. So he is not deluded into thinking that everything they do is perfect. So I think there's an analogy there we can bring into our own lives. Listen to people who you disagree with.
That's it. That's it. And yeah, I think we could all use with a little less echo chambers and a little more openness to the other side. But I suppose that's a topic for our next podcast we do on politics. The second one. But that's all we have time on this one. Thank you as always, John, for your invaluable insights. And my hope is that, even though there may be a bias that we bring in, that the goal of this conversation is always that we do bring a critical thinking into both sides of the table, so people can make decisions. So if that's not the case, tell us. Send us an email, or if you have any articles to add, whether they're from the real estate industry or anything that completely opposes the idea that remote first or hybrid is a good idea, absolutely, please send them our way. You can pop them in the Coda document that you see a link for in the show notes. We want to discuss all sides and we want to be open-minded. So please help us be that. But in the meantime, John, lovely chatting with you. Hope the weather in Cork improves and you don't have any more storms. We'll be watching the rugby from here, unfortunately, until 4 years in Australia. And I'll chat to you next month. Take care.
See ya.